Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and today we're wrapping up the end of Week 6 on Day 49. The news that has come out today has been huge. I've seen a lot of people in the comments trying to refute whether it happened or not, but we got confirmation just a few minutes before the stream that the Ukrainians now do not have the largest victory at sea with the Orsk being sunk at Berdyansk Harbor. Now they have claimed the flagship of the Black Sea fleet, the Moskva Battlecruiser. We're going to cover that news actually first tonight in terms of schedule. But before we go through the schedule and such, I'm going to hand this over to Enforcer Matt, and he's going to say a few words real quick. And so, take it away, Matthew.
So, good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you once again. Just real quick, I want to give everybody a reminder that the limited edition Leaf Spring merch will only be available until Friday at 11 p.m. Central Time. So, if you want to support the channel and get some limited edition merch, head on over to the store and check it out while it's still available. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it back over to the Enforcer. And real quick before I hand it back, I want to thank everybody for their massive support of the channel. The merch store has been an absolute success. So thank you all very much for your support.
All right, and so now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about the schedule for tonight's news. Of course, we're going to cover the Moskva first. We've gotten 3 bits of news about it, and this is probably the biggest news to come out of this week, maybe the entire war in terms of the naval battles going on outside in the Black Sea. We're then going to move to the Kyiv area because we've gotten a large amount of news from there today. Huge amounts of diplomatic strides have been made with Ukraine and Western nations. We're then going to move on to the location unknowns, cover the location unknowns. Then we're going to take a break before we move on down to the Donbass, which we're going to cover everything from Kharkiv to Mariupol in one large group. Then we're going to stop and take 3 to 5 more questions from the chat. We'll then move on back towards Kherson, and then we'll wrap up with the international news that we've gotten today here in St. Petersburg, Finland, and the United States. So, without further ado, here is the big news, y'all. The Moskva sank just a minute ago. We're not exactly sure if it has rolled over and sank yet, but the crew has abandoned the ship, all 510 of them. The Russians made a statement 2 hours ago. Well, let me go through the sequence of events before I start talking about what's just happened recently, so that way you can see the whole entire story from the beginning to the end. The Moskva was steaming somewhere in the Black Sea, close to the Ukrainian coast, and when I say close, probably around 100 miles or 70 miles away from the coast, and the Ukrainians fired 2 Neptune Anti Ship Missiles from the coast towards the Moskva. I'm not exactly sure how they hit the ship, but nonetheless, the Ukrainians accounted that the 2 Neptune Anti-Ship Missiles hit the Moskva, and according to Ukrainian accounts, they hit the ammo stowage, which is I think is the proper terminology, and the ship went up like a Roman candle. The parts of the crew that hadn't been killed, I'm assuming, which it sounds like most of them were still alive, managed to abandon ship promptly afterwards, and now the burning husk of the Moskva is now adrift at sea. Now, a lot of y'all are probably thinking that's not true. The Russians say that, it's doing this, it's doing that. They're saying that it's flying around the moon and it's just fine. The thing is, though, is that a few hours ago, about 4 or 5 hours ago, the Russians came out with a statement. It was the silliest, most see-through statement I've ever seen. They said, a small fire has broken out on the Moskva. However, there's no need for concern. We've evacuated the entire crew in light of the small fire to keep them all safe, and just in case if it's dangerous. And you can see through that, obviously. I mean, like, hopefully all of y'all can, because why in the world? There are firefighting crews on ships. And that's just standard, because if you don't have firefighting crews on ships, once a small spark turns into a small fire, everyone has to abandon the ship, and then you're in a terrible situation. So that is obviously see-through. And on top of that, why in the world would you evacuate the entire crew in light of a small fire? That doesn't make any sense. Then just about 30 minutes to an hour ago, the Russians actually confirmed that the ship has been abandoned and that it has taken severe damage. We have that here in this bulletin. Well, actually, I'm sorry, no. It's actually this one. This is the Russian Ministry of Defense a few hours ago giving an official statement that the Moskva is on fire, and then they say that the crew was evacuated off the ship due to the fire, which makes no sense. And then here, just to give you all a concept of how big this ship is in terms of how important it is, there are fleets in every single navy, just to kind of give an explanation, and there are flagships of these fleets. Let me pull this up just to give you all an idea. U.S. flagships. All right, this is probably going to give us the entire list of flagships. We're going to go down to the bottom where the U.S. will probably be, and I'm going to show y'all what the U.S. flagship is, and you'll start to probably see the picture of what flagships stand as. United States Navy. No, it's not the U. Wait a minute, hang on. Oh, my lord, hang on. 1 second, let me find it. U.S. flagships of the fleets. Hopefully they'll just show us the flagships of the fleets. What's the current flagship? That's not going to tell me. Good lord. Okay, so I'm going to give you all a historical context because I'm better at that than trying to pull this up on the fly. If you remember the HMS Victory at the Battle of Trafalgar, which is an incredibly very old-fashioned kind of comparison here, but nonetheless, that was the largest and most powerful ship in the Royal Navy at that time, and it gets the flagship status, which means it's kind of like the pride of the fleet. And the Moskva had this exact same status. The Moskva was the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet for the Russian Federation, which means that it was the best ship in that fleet, and it was bristling with arms. You know, the most powerful one is usually the one that becomes the flagship. I believe in the United States Navy, the aircraft carriers are the flagships of most fleets, like the 7th Fleet. Let's pull that up. Let's actually see that. 7th Fleet flagship. I'm sure it's United States 7th Fleet. Let's scroll through here real quick to the present day, and let's see. Okay, the George Washington, this is a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, was the flagship of the fleet, let me see here, 7th Fleet before 2017. I'm not sure if they decommissioned this Nimitz-class carrier. They have been decommissioning some with the hopes of replacing them with Gerald R. Ford classes, but nonetheless, you can see, as you know, it's common knowledge, aircraft carriers are the pride of the U.S. Navy. And so these get flagship titles most of the times when they're assigned to a fleet. And so that gives you the idea of how important the Moskva is to the Russian Navy, and specifically the Black Sea Fleet. And the fact that that ship was hit and sank tells you a lot. So now with that in mind, I'm going to show y'all a picture of the Moskva that was put on Reddit. And this is the ship. It was also in the thumbnail as well. And it is bristling with, when I say bristling, this thing is loaded with arms. It has something like 18 S-300 surface-to-air missiles, which are used to shoot down aircraft. They're incredibly capable. I'm not exactly sure about the armaments on the front, so we're going to pull up the Moskva cruiser and see if we can get any information on it. So just see how much firepower the Ukrainians have just sank over the course of an hour, well, a few hours at this point. So let's see here. We're going to scroll down to armament. Has 16 P500 Basalts or P1000 Vulcan anti-ship missiles. So it has the capability to carry 16 of them. I'm assuming that they're housed within these silos here at the front because there's 8 on each side, which equals 16. So you can see there that they actually have a pretty decent amount of firepower, especially considering that these are supersonic cruise missiles, which they probably use, if we take a quick look at this, are probably using against Ukrainian land targets. Also, they have 8 times 8, so they have 64 S-300Fs. So I actually got the number a little bit off. That's actually an incredibly high number. And in the modern world, with how naval wars have kind of developed in a way, naval wars don't really revolve around ships shooting at each other directly. It really more revolves around aircraft attacking these ships, either whether they're land-based or not, or from a carrier. But nonetheless, you can see from this list here on Wikipedia, at least, that this ship was bristling with firepower, and it was the pride of the Russian fleet. And now, just like the Bismarck and many ships that came before it that were considered flagships and the pride of their navies, of their countries, this ship will join them at the bottom of the sea. Also, the last bit of news we've gotten up here is information on the Neptune cruise missiles. This is for anyone who downloads the map. I wanted to put this here really quickly so that way you could get a little bit of a story of the Neptune anti-ship missiles and see what their capabilities are, at least at what's publicly known on Wikipedia. And so with that, incredible news. This is the perfect way to end week 6, is with the Russian flagship being destroyed to the point it has to be abandoned and left adrift at sea. That pretty much means that that ship is never going to be used again. If the crew abandons it, it's lost. All hope is lost to recover it. So we're now going to move on towards the Kyiv area, where we've gotten some interesting news today showing that most of the members of the Baltic states and Poland have had their presidents travel to Kyiv all at the same time, actually. You can see them all here in this one picture to meet Volodymyr Zelensky. We know that a lot of heads of state have been traveling there. We know that the British went there a few days ago, with Boris Johnson, and now we see that the Baltic states and the Polish president are all coming together and going there at one single time. This is showing a lot of solidarity, especially with the Eastern European countries that are closer to Russia and their stance against Russian aggression. Moving on throughout the rest of the city, we're going to move out of the city to try and keep things in a little bit of order here. We can see that the Polish president, put Russian president there. Obviously, the Russian president isn't visiting there anytime soon, but we can see the Polish president visiting Borodyanka in this picture. So he is reviewing the damage. Not only are heads of state taking a look at the damage that's been caused by the Russians and their blatant war crimes, but probably one of the most important institutions that can take a look at this, The Hague. Today, stand by. Today, the chief prosecutor of The Hague has arrived in the Bucha city area and is reviewing the evidence of war crimes that have been committed by the Russians. I think this is a great step in the right direction, especially with how Russian war criminals should be treated, because now the Ukrainian concerns and the blatant crimes that have been committed will hopefully be addressed by The Hague within the coming weeks or after the war, depending on if the Ukrainians are able to keep the Russians that they have captured over the course of the war as part of the peace agreement. So we're now going to move back down here where we can see that an impressive cleanup has been underway in Irpin. Loads of volunteers have flooded into the city, and they've been managing to clear out the rubble and damage in a surprising amount of time. They're doing an incredible amount of work, and I've got to give it to the brave soldiers, firefighters, and now the volunteers that are doing as much as they can to defend their country and ensure that things are kept in the best running order possible. And you got to say, look at the amount of community involvement here. Got to really say, they've been cleaning this up incredibly well. Hardly even a shard of glass or garbage is left on these streets. And it's getting rife for the West to step in and really start giving a large amount of monetary aid for them to start rebuilding the country from the ground up, and hopefully much better than it was before the war. Hopefully they can get rid of the asbestos as well, since we found out the Ukrainians don't have a law prohibiting the use of it inside of buildings. So nonetheless, it's incredibly good to see. And so now we're going to move back into Kyiv, where we've seen President Zelensky give an address in English. That's why I've included this one today, because it's not just a text-to-speech translation. This is purely in English of him asking for more weapons and more supplies. So I'm going to not speak much. I'm going to let this great man talk. Of course he's not talking live, it's on video, but nonetheless his words are very important. Impressive guy to stay there for this long and actually see his country through until now, and we'll have to see how it goes in the coming weeks. But here's the video.
Launched a full-scale war against Ukraine on February 24th. Now it's April. Russia counted on capturing Ukraine within 5 days. That was the deadline they established for obliterating our country and destroying our democracy. But they had no idea who they were up against. Russia didn't know how much we cherished our freedom. We've been defending ourselves against Russia much longer than they invaders planned. We have destroyed more Russian weapons and military equipment than some armies in Europe currently possess. But this is not enough. Russia still had the capacity to attack, and not only against Ukraine. Poland, Moldova, Romania, and the Baltic states will become the next targets if the freedom of Ukraine falls.
Okay, I'm going to have to skip past this part in particular. I hate to do that because the thing is that YouTube will come down here and get me if they see me showing the stuff that Zelensky showed. But I highly suggest to everyone watching the video that y'all do click on the link in the description below that will send you to the map I'm using right now, and you can review that footage for yourselves. I've kind of showed that on stream before, but they actually came down from YouTube and gave me a very stern warning about showing that kind of stuff on here, so unfortunately I can't show that without getting in severe trouble, so we're just going to move on from that.
Armed vehicles, air defense systems, and combat aircraft. Anything to repel Russian forces and stop their war crimes. Artillery 155 millimeters. Artillery shells 152 millimeters, as many as possible. Multiple launch rocket systems. Grad, Smersh, Tornado, or M142 HIMARS. Armored vehicles, APC, infantry, fighting vehicles, others, tanks, T-72 or similar tanks from the USA or Germany, air defense systems, S-300, Buk or Western equivalents, military aircraft must have to deblock our cities and save millions of Ukrainians as well as millions of Europeans. Freedom must be armed better than tyranny.
Okay. I've got to say that I don't want to pause this and interrupt him, but that's a quote right there that should go down in history. Freedom must be armed better than tyranny. Now, that is something that will be in the history books, much like it's associated with Otto von Bismarck, his quotes, Napoleon, and so on. This will be something associated with Zelensky, much like Churchill has his quotes as well. So I'm going to let this continue now. I got to say, that was a very good quote right there. A very good line he said right there, and that's definitely something I will quote in the future because that was good. That's all I can say. Anyways, I'm going to let the video continue.
Armed better than tyranny. Western countries have everything to make it happen. The final victory over the tyranny and the number of people saved depends on them. Arm Ukraine now to defend freedom.
And I have to entirely agree. We do know that Western countries, and we will cover this later on in the stream once more, are taking huge strides to try and deliver as much arms and aid to Ukraine as possible. And we can see that the Australians have finally delivered on their order of Bushmasters today as they were being unloaded at the Boryspil airport near Kyiv. And look at that. Now, we saw these actually a while ago on film inside of the Bucha Hostomel European area, and they were being used by Ukrainian police. And I didn't know at the time that those were Bushmasters that were Ukrainian-made. Well, not Ukrainian, Australian-made. And I said, man, those things look pretty damn mean, you know, and sorry for language there, but they do. I mean, like, they just look really good. And beyond their actual capabilities and characteristics, they just look mean. And so for anything, because appearance does matter in war, for the propaganda purposes, these armored vehicles just look mean, and so I think they'll actually be used incredibly well. And we can see this one's actually being marked for humanitarian purposes because it has a red cross on it. But look at that, wow. We can also see that Antonov has sent one of their aircraft, and it looks like it's being unloaded as well. What's really interesting about this is that I actually saw a little bit of footage. Let me see again. I can't tell if there's 2 engines on that wing, but we actually saw a very similar variant of Antonov aircraft take off from a U.S. military base in Japan today. And so I'm wondering if that aircraft is the same one we saw in Japan almost a day ago. At least I saw on video. I didn't include it on here because it was just a very mundane video. And I wonder what it has sent over in terms of arms and supplies, considering it's flown all the way from Japan. But look at those trucks. Now, that's a very nice armored vehicle right there. I mean, like, if anything, they just look very nice. I don't know how much armor they have or what they can be protected against, but very interesting and very nice-looking vehicles. And I'm glad that the Australians have provided 20 of these Bushmasters, and I'm sure that the Ukrainians will put them to incredibly good use incredibly soon. We're now going to move on from the Kyiv area to the location unknowns. We've had a decent amount today, not as much as others, which I'm incredibly happy about, because I do like to try and make sure that the information can be tracked down and we can find out where it is. So it's just a good thing to know that we have less and less of these, and more of the markers of the news can be sent to the places they actually happened in. So with that, we're going to get to the location unknown news. The first thing is that we can see these Czech SPGs being used by the Ukrainians inside of Ukraine. These are very interesting. We're actually going to pull these up here in a second because they're just a very interesting system to see in a normal picture. Also, let me mute that because there's copyrighted music in it, sadly. But nonetheless, it fires, and it's a neat video to see. So now we're going to take a little dive. Oops. We're going to take a little bit of a dive into this SPG itself. This is a very, very interesting system, and it's kind of what modern SPGs are moving in the direction of in some countries. So this here is a V-77 Dana. These are 152mm SPGs, I believe. Let me make sure that I am correct. The Czechoslovak Socialist Republic produces these, and we have seen a lot of countries go through development processes to try and develop SPGs that are similar in design to this, where they're wheeled instead of tracked, and that helps them, of course, in the modern world, because most roads are paved, to move faster down paved roads. Tracked vehicles can only go so fast. Now, you know, of course, there are a few examples out there that can go incredibly fast, but there are limitations to that kind of layout. Wheeled vehicles can move incredibly fast on paved roads. We can see that they're operating on a dirt road here, which is interesting, but it doesn't look like it's a slush, which then that's when tracked vehicles come in handy. But nonetheless, there were 750 of these produced. We don't know how many the Czechs have sent to Ukraine, and we don't really know how many of these are still in operation. But it's an incredibly good and interesting system to see, and I'm so glad that we are seeing a decent amount of foreign-lended vehicles from other countries operating inside of Ukraine, because it shows that the support internationally is overwhelming for this war. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see from inside of a BTR-80, this is rare footage right here, of an ambush being conducted by the Ukrainians on this Russian BTR. So I'm going to let y'all see the footage. And so without further ado, here it is. But I'm going to pause it real quick and unmute it so that way we can get this on full screen and start it from the beginning. And so here it is. I love this. He closed the top part of the door, but he didn't close the larger part of the bottom of the door, which is about 2/3 of the thing. The top part folds outwards to the left, but the bottom part kind of just falls outwards and towards the ground. And so, of course, logically, there's really no way he can pick that thing up without sticking himself out of the vehicle, and then he could fall out. But still, it was just funny to see him do such a little actual effort and help in making their situation a little bit better, because there's still this massive gaping hole in the side of this BTR where enemy fire could come through. Also, I would like to note that he hit his head moving it back in once the round hit incredibly close to their vehicle. Let's watch that again. The Ukrainians never give the Russians a break. It's hilarious to see that they never do. But anyways, I'm gonna let the video continue. You can see that they've now shut off the whole entire door, because now it's dark inside of the tank. So you can see they're trying to move down the road. I'm assuming that they're trying to get away from the Ukrainians on the side of the road, of course, because it doesn't look like the situation is going well for them. Oh, look, he's got a little smiley face on the side of his turret. I'm sure that'll help. Well, side of his helmet, not turret. But I'm sure that we won't have to worry about the actual terminology of this because the tank is probably going to brew up later on. I watched this video halfway through, but I haven't watched the whole thing because there's a lot of time constraints going on behind the scenes. But anyways, here's the rest of the video. So now we can hear that engine revving up. They're trying to get out of there as fast as they can, I'm assuming. And you can actually see the turret actually spinning around inside of that small little hole right there. You see? That's the turret basket spinning around. And based off of this ribbon here, we can assume, I'm going to take a general assumption here, it may be wrong, but every time we've seen the black and orange ribbon on Russian troops, it always means that there's some kind of VDV/airborne troops. So I'm assuming that these may be VDV troops. So now they've gotten out of the BTR, they've dismounted the vehicle. And now they're climbing back inside the BTR. Trying to move around all the film equipment. That guy hit his head. They can't get... No one in this tank so far has gotten in or out of this vehicle on film without hitting their head. Look at this guy again. He smacked it dead on. Bam! Got his helmet almost caught on it. So now we can see that someone actually shot through the glass on the front of the BTR-80. I'm assuming that this isn't bulletproof glass. It looks like the frame that this glass pane is held in is incredibly thin. So I'm assuming that most of the armor protection for the windows on the front of the tank, on the front of this APC, come from the little bit of a thick, probably rolled homogeneous flap that pretty much sits on top of the windshield. So that's interesting. So now we can see them loading up a Russian soldier into a civilian car, probably because he's wounded and they're trying to get him off somewhere. And so that's the end of the video. So now we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see, and this is rare. Now, we've heard a lot about javelins, but we've never seen a lot of footage. But today, they broke the case. This is very good news right here. We've seen a javelin being used once more. So you can see that the Javelin has been launched. It's heading out to a vehicle right out there. It's kind of that black dot on the tree line, and it's a dead-on hit. And it looks like that vehicle may start brewing up here in a bit, but unfortunately the video cuts out before we can see that. Now, real quick, I'm going to look at my internet real quick. It is fine. It's looking good. So I would like to check with Matthew real quick. Is there something going on? Because I just took a look at the chat and it looks like we may be having some lag issues.
So it's currently just the weather outside, unfortunately. So we're going to be having a little bit of internet issues for probably the next 20 to 30 minutes. So just please bear with us. Hopefully it passes over pretty quick.
All right, so I forgot about that completely. We actually have a large storm passing over where we are right now. It's kind of like the perfect storm kind of thing. So everyone bear with us if possible. I'm sorry for the interruptions that we will be facing during this. But nonetheless, the news must continue. And so we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see Russian forces hit with a Ukrainian rocket barrage. This is kind of a little bit of common footage, but once again, the most uncommon thing about this, in a way, is that it's happening to the Russians, who at the beginning of the war were thought of to be supermen, or have an incredibly powerful army, in a way. And so here's the footage. As we can see, I'm assuming that this is a drone watching them, and we can now see the rockets flying in and hitting around the Russian vehicles. So now we can see, once again, I believe this may be some older footage, but we can see artillery landing around what appears to be a line of SPGs in the field. Now we can see even more artillery raining down on a road. Now we can see this line of SPGs once again under direct artillery fire, and it looks like some of them are actually trying to break out of the area of fire. And then once again, we kind of clip back to the footage we saw at the start, which is rockets just pouring down on Russian units. It's good stuff to see. It's good to know that the Ukrainians are smacking them around absolutely everywhere on this front line. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a Ukrainian fire a grenade at a Russian officer. So I'm just going to let y'all see the footage. It is self-explanatory in a way. The title says it all. So here's the video. Right there. So this, we're actually seeing this footage, I believe, from the perspective of the Russian officer. It's not really clear by the caption, but whatever it was, which is probably was some kind of a rifle launched grenade, if you like to say that, probably launched from an kind of like undermounted grenade launcher. It hit somewhere right in front of him and blew up. Right there. And so this guy, he goes running off.
Все хорошо, это я.
And he sounded like he...
Я по ней отработал, хуй знает, попал, не попал.
Sounds like he's speaking Russian, so I'm assuming that he's Russian. Alright, and so with that, we've reached the end of that video. Really self-explanatory in a way, just interesting to see. And so we're now going to move on to the next video, where we see the Ukrainian soldiers playing a bandura. A bandura, I believe, is a traditional Ukrainian instrument, kind of like how the balalaika is a Russian instrument, and the domra is, I believe, I would like to make sure on that, though. Let's just pull up a little bit of information on the bandura, actually, take a good look at it. Bandura instrument. Bandura is Ukrainian. It apparently... Let's see here. Let's see if we can get a little bit of a history on this thing. Just really quickly. It was often referred to by the term kopsa. So before the 1940s, it was called a kopsa. Very interesting, but nonetheless, it is a traditional Ukrainian instrument, and we can see here a Ukrainian soldier playing it. Sadly, it's really quiet. I can't even hear it. Man, this guy sounds like he would have been an opera singer before this war. I hate that y'all probably can't hear this, but this guy is actually belting it out on this thing incredibly well. So, unfortunately, I don't know if y'all could have heard that or not, but if you couldn't, there is a link to the map in the description below. Make sure to go down there and click on it, and you can actually go to this specific marker. It's in the location unknowns, second one on the second row to the left, and so you can go check that one out for yourself. That guy actually played that incredibly well and was singing incredibly well. Also, to everyone who has joined the stream a little bit late, because I'm sure that a lot of people have, we did cover the sinking of the Moskva just at the beginning of the stream, and I'll probably actually cover that twice, considering that's the largest news that we've gotten in a long time, and I would like for a lot of people to come through and get the news. So, Matthew, if you can make sure to send through messages every once in a while to everyone in the chat that we will go over the Moskva news again if they just got here, I would be very appreciative of that. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see something unfortunate. It's not really exactly described the story as to why this license plate is being used to identify these people, whether they didn't have any identification on the bodies to figure out who they were, or whether they were disfigured to the point it was impossible to identify them. But nonetheless, people in Ukraine have begun to be buried with their license plates over their graves, so that way some form of identification can hopefully be made as to who these bodies were before, you know, the Russians pretty much slaughtered them like the war criminals they are. So it's kind of an unfortunate and a bit of a harrowing thing to really think about and see, thinking that someone can be so disfigured that they don't even really, this is of course assuming that they had identification on them and it was destroyed as well. That people can be so disfigured from what's going on in this war that people can't even identify who they are, and they just have to bury them with a license plate on their car and hope that someday those bodies can be identified and they can say who they were. That's something really rough to think about. But nonetheless, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a Georgian sniper arrive that apparently served in the Georgian War in Abkhazia. I believe is the correct pronunciation. But she has arrived, and she said that she will fight until the end. And so, hopefully, she joins Wally, who's been used for nothing but reconnaissance at this point from what we've heard. But his reconnaissance has been incredibly valuable. So, hopefully, she joins the ranks as well and starts providing valuable information and reconnaissance to the Ukrainians that they can use in their counterattacks and in preparing better defenses. So with that, we're now going to move on to the last two bits of location unknown news for the night, where we can see some firefighters rescue a puppy. A 77-year-old man and the puppy were apparently directly hit by some kind of Russian fire. Luckily, the 77-year-old man got out of the situation mostly unharmed, but his puppy was buried under the rubble. Fortunately, through a lot of elbow grease and hard work by the Ukrainian firefighters, they were able to save the puppy as well. And so here's the video.
У остальных вокруг повылетали окна, двери. Скулит, слышишь?
So you see them sifting through the rubble. They're looking for the dog.
Главное, чтобы живой был.
Без матюков. Аккуратно.
They're digging it out. You can see it's still alive, thank God.
Ему надо воды, да, воды. Вот.
And they got him.
О, молодец. Нормально. Живучий.
Look at that.
Мы это сделали.
It's a miracle that that little puppy survived under all that fallen rubble. And you know, the 77-year-old man must be incredibly happy to know that his little buddy has survived.
Красавец, сейчас водички попьет.
Спасибо хлопчикам, що швидко, оперативно все зробили тут. Все підключали. Спасибо їм. Велике спасибо.
That's incredibly sweet. Once again, I want to cover this because a lot of people probably don't understand. Why do you cover dog? Like, probably a decent amount of people may have the question. Enforcer, why do you cover some stories about dogs almost nightly at this point? Well, dogs are have something of a special relationship with people. And dogs, you know, while people, you know, people on people violence in the way in wars, it happens, you know, it's terrible and it's unfortunate, and I feel I feel more sorry for the people that die more so than the dogs, but nonetheless, the dogs are companions of these people, and they mean a lot to the people that own them, and the dogs, of course, are very sweet, and they really have no idea what's going on, and so it's kind of an unfortunate thing all around to see dogs get injured or killed, and it's just a wonderful thing to see that every once in a while a dog, like a little puppy like this one that means so much to that 77-year-old man, was actually able to survive and be recovered from the rubble. It's just a sweet little bit of news, and it's also a bit of light and a bit of all the doom and gloom. But today we haven't had much doom and gloom, fortunately, and so we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see unreleased Ukrainian war footage that was released by the Ukrainians today. Unfortunately, I have to mute it because the Ukrainians play copyrighted music, which is very unfortunate, but nonetheless, we can take a look at all of the interesting footage that they've sent out today. So the first bit looks like a whole bunch of grads launching, or maybe smirches. We can then see artillery fire landing in the countryside. We can now see a tank firing. Now we can see a whole bunch of combat montage footage with helicopters, and also appears BTR-4s. Everything's going by incredibly fast, but we can see here, and we haven't seen a lot of these in terms of footage on the Ukrainian side, an OSA surface-to-air missile launcher, which is actually somewhat rare as far as we've seen on video that the Ukrainians use. then a column of T-64s. The footage is going by incredibly quickly, and I wish I could play the music with it because the music is great complementary to the video that's being shown. But unfortunately, YouTube will come down here and they will wrap my knuckles with a ruler. And, I don't want that because that's scary. Anyways, we can see in these videos, the Ukrainians are giving hell. And I think some of this may have been pre-war as well. But nonetheless, very good footage that they've set up. And a very good propaganda film as a whole. It makes you pretty proud of what they're doing, especially when you listen to the music, which I would highly suggest, click on the map in the description below and go listen to the music and the whole entire video uninterrupted yourselves. That right there, I know that the IL-76 isn't dropping any sort of cargo right now in this war. We can see them firing some kind of Conkers in that last bit of footage. Now we can see a little bit of war footage, some MLRSs, a little bit of the Ukrainian Navy in action. Some Humvees, that was pretty neat. More artillery. All around, a very well-made video. Of course, all of it isn't from the current war, but still, the Ukrainians do an incredibly good job in the PR and propaganda department as far as what they're doing online on the internet, and videos like these only make their side look that much better. So I gotta say, an incredibly good job to the Ukrainian Armed Forces who put together that video. And with that, we have reached the end of the news that is kind of in the Northern Front and the location unknowns. So before we move on to covering all the news we've gotten out of the Donbass today, we're going to stop to take 3 to 5 questions from the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so first up, we have a super chat from Orlos the Druid, who puts in a $50 donation. Thank you very much for your generous donation. He says, Enforcer, take this and pay a bill or buy some groceries. All my love.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and it does help us to run the channel. So I thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from HT, a longtime channel supporter as well, putting in a $20 donation, who says, logistics in war is everything. Why don't the Ukrainians preemptively attack these columns that are now on Ukrainian soil?
That's a very good question, and it's something that I would like to go over again, because a lot of people wondered, why were the Ukrainians not so quick to destroy the 40-mile-long convoy when it was a existent thing in the Northern Front? And here's why. Let's say, we're going to draw the entire thing out, because that's a great question. Let's say there's a 30-mile-long convoy going from Vovchansk towards Prikolotny. Hopefully I pronounced those a little bit correctly, but we're going to draw a little line. This is going to be our convoy. We're going to say that's a 30-mile-long convoy. Convoy. We'll just put that. And we'll keep it black, but we're going to thicken the line a little bit so that way it can be seen better. So this convoy will snake its way across the roads. They usually move kind of slowly, usually about 10 miles a day, because a convoy that large is a really hard thing to coordinate, and so it has to move at a slower speed. On top of that, convoys in the military just move slower just because they normally do. That's kind of like the going doctrine. But anyways, this convoy isn't left entirely unprotected. First off, they usually move a decent ways behind the lines. Secondly, they usually have air support. So whenever these convoys are moving, and we saw this in the northern Kyiv area, the Russians create something of an exclusion zone around all sides of the convoy with air patrols, like such as helicopters and aircraft, that make sure that the Ukrainians just can't send in Su-24s and Su-25s and obliterate the entire convoy before it can get anywhere. So we're going to call this the aircraft exclusion zone. So we're going to put that down right here, put that in red, since it's a danger zone. We'll put that in light red right there. And so that is kind of the basis of how these convoys work. Because when the 40-mile-long convoy stalled in northern Kyiv, we saw that the Ukrainians were desperately trying to find a way to destroy that convoy. They started doing it with Bayraktars, but that was much later after the convoy had stalled, and it appeared that the Russian air defenses around that convoy had kind of been laxed a little bit because they just couldn't keep up that kind of level of effort and supply in terms of the Air Force because it had to be used elsewhere. So then you would see Bayraktars fly over here and there and maybe get a successful strike on 1 or 2 vehicles, but mostly what destroyed the 40-mile-long convoy was that the ground forces, a group of special forces operating off of ATVs, would move around the convoy near the front of it, and they would hit vehicles with ATGMs like Stugnas and such. And so that was really the only way they were able to inflict any kind of damage on the 40-mile-long convoy in northern Kyiv. And I believe that's going to be the same case because the Russians never learn anything, and they do the exact same things over and over in this war. We'll see that later in the news. But that's like the general answer as to why this is, kind of like this is kind of like the explanation of why the convoys don't get destroyed just outright and immediately, is because they're not just on their own. They usually have some kind of air cover and air support to ensure that they just don't get wiped out. So I hope that does answer the question in a way, and I hope that lets a lot of other people know what we observed with the northern convoy, the 40-mile-long one, weeks ago, earlier on in the war. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a very generous donation of $100 from longtime channel supporter Naria, who says, "Keep up the good work."
And I thank you so much for the support. It does mean a lot to us, and it does help us to run the channel. So I got to thank you so much. And with that, we're now going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the news in Kharkiv and the Donbass, including Mariupol.
All right, and the last one of the segment goes to Taras Shevchenko, who puts in a $20 donation and says, "Does the destruction of the Moskva give Ukraine an opening to make an amphibious hop from Mykolaiv to Kherson?"
Let's see, Mykolaiv, amphibious. Well, that's a tough one because I don't know the exact size. Well, actually, I bet that's probably public information. Let's see. Black Sea Fleet ships. Let's see the list of ships that the Russians have inside of the Black Sea Fleet, at least as far as we publicly know. I'm sure the defense forces around the world using satellite footage are able to get a much better idea of who's doing what and what kind of ships are in the fleet. So let's see here. They have the Moskva, which is a Slava-class cruiser. The only one, apparently, in the entire Black Sea Fleet of its kind. It's the fleet flagship, and it says severely damaged by explosion today on the Wikipedia, but it actually sank as far as we know. The crews abandoned it, so that means it will sink. That's exactly what happened with the Vasily Baikov. It got hit, caught on fire, the crew abandoned it, and then 2 or 3 days later, it rolled over and sank. They also have the Ladny and I will not pronounce that one, but they're both Krivok-class cruisers, apparently. Let me make sure. Frigates, actually. Apparently, the Moskva is the only cruiser they had in the entire fleet, as far as we can see here. So that's incredibly interesting. They only had one cruiser, and the rest of them are frigates, I'm assuming. And these are also frigates. These are all Admiral Grigorovich class cruisers. And then we have one that was projected to be released into service in 2022, which is called the Steregushevsky class. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. That's probably a terrible pronunciation. We'll call it the Project 2038-0, more so, because I believe that'll be a proper description of that. But nonetheless, that one is projected in 2022. We don't even know if it's out there, and it's still only a Corvette. Here in the rest of the fleet, we can see that they have a Kilo class sub, then they have a whole bunch of improved Kilo. So all of their submarines inside of the fleet are all Kilo class submarines of some kind. We can see that most of them are actually based out of Novorossiysk, which I won't pull that up on Google Maps. We will then move on to the next bit. We're going to look through the whole fleet. Well, we won't. We'll probably save ourselves time because most of these ships become small. And then the Assault Ship Brigade, we can see that they have Alligator class. And we can see here the Orsk, which we already know was sank. It was destroyed in an attack in Berdyansk on March 24th. That was another incredibly good day, but we're going to skip through the rest of them because you can get the idea that in terms of actual attack ships, it seems, and we'll check, the Grisha is anti-submarine corvette. These are minesweepers. So really, in terms of combat ships that are actually, I guess you could call them ships of the line, they only have around, well, it's like 7 of them. So it's an incredibly small number, and then beyond that, they have Kilo-class submarines. So the loss of the Moskva is a huge loss to the Black Sea Fleet in terms of its actual combat firepower. So I believe that this may actually make them incredibly rethink their position if they were planning on some kind of naval invasion. And this may actually, much like the Battle of Jutland led the German Navy to port for the rest of World War One, this may lead the Black Sea Fleet to the ports of Sevastopol and Novorossiysk, which is right over here, for the duration of the war, considering that they really can't be used anymore. Or if they are used, they're going to be used as floating cruise missile platforms in a way. So I think that it wouldn't be too far out of the question, actually, to see the Ukrainians try and conduct some kind of very short-range amphibious operation from Mykolaiv to Kherson. Once again, that's nothing more than speculation, though. It could happen. It may be a little impractical, considering they may not have a lot of ways to defend an amphibious assault even at such a short distance. But nonetheless, I do hope that answers the question. And with that, we've reached the end of this segment. I thank you all so much for your support. It really does help out this channel. And with that, we're now going to move on to the news in Kharkiv, the Donbass, and Mariupol as well. And so with that, let's get to the news we've seen in Kharkiv. Starting off, we've gotten a lot of news about the ecological park that is in Kharkiv. First, we saw the tapirs, which are apparently some kind of African like pig-looking thing. We saw those being evacuated. Now we can see that evacuation of the eco park and all of its animals is still continuing, as kind of like the managers and directors of the eco park say that they're going to keep evacuating the animals until the last one is left.
Вітаємо вас, друзі. Ми продовжуємо. Ось наша команда. І ми евакуюємо звірів.
So you can see that they have some kind of antelopes back there. Pretty neat. And also some other animals appear, some kind of birds. So an incredibly interesting thing to see once more, and it's so good to know that the Ukrainians are taking care of everything they can, including their animals instead of the ecological parks. It shows that they have a large amount of care for their citizens and everything else included. And so with that, we're now going to move on down into the Donbass area, where we've actually gotten a small amount of news today. Starting off, we've seen that an ATGM was used in the Donbass today. There's nothing really more to add to this video. We don't even know which side used it, so here's the video.
Давай!
Also, another interesting thing in this video is that you can actually see the wire that is attached to the guidance system, because some anti-tank guided missiles aren't actually like connected through like some sort of like, you know, wireless connection. Some of them are actually wire guided, and so the input heading to the missile is actually transferred over this wire, which is an incredibly interesting thing. But you can actually see the wire in this video, and the ATGM appears to hit the position dead on. Sounds like this guy might be speaking Russian, so I don't know if they're pro-Russian forces or not. But nonetheless, that is the end of that video. And so we're now going to move on further down towards the area of Donetsk. And I also just remembered that it's not Kharkiv, it's Kharkiv. So sorry about that, everyone. But we're now going to move on down to the area closer to Donetsk, where we've seen a drone artillery strike on Russian infantry conducted and spotted by a Ukrainian drone. So here's the footage of that. Oh no. Mute. We don't have that. I don't want to get in trouble. Anyways, we can see the Russian forces kind of meeting up on the road. Here we can see them kind of having a little bit of a chit-chat. And then they pass ways and keep on going. And this guy keeps on circling him. And you see he picked up something that looks kind of like an RPG or some kind of long rod, but I can't really tell what it is exactly. Anyways, this drone is just stalking him, which is very creepy to me every single time I see that. It's like, that's so weird. They have no idea they're being watched. So the video continues. They keep on walking. Now they turn down off of kind of like the slightly paved paths to now the dirt paths. And now we can see them continuing to walk on down that path a little bit further on. And now we can see them running in between the bushes and such. And it looks like something just rocked the drone. I'm not exactly sure, but it is vibrating a little bit. Now we can see an overview of that forested area where they were. And we can actually see here there's the road that they were on. They then turned off, and this is where the mouse cursor is. They then turned off down this path here that the mouse is following, and then they walked over here into the woods. We saw them running around in here somewhere. It looked like they were right around here. And now we can see the artillery fire landing directly on where we last saw them. So as we could see, the artillery continues to pour in. We once again see another hit very close to the positions of those Russian forces, and we know that the Ukrainians are giving it to them. It's of course impressive to me that the Ukrainians have integrated drone technology so well into their artillery spotter units, because it's making their artillery fire that much more accurate and deadly compared to the Russian artillery fire that we see on film, which is close, but it's never accurate enough. So we can see another shot land somewhere in the tree line. We don't know the condition of the infantry, but now we see some smoldering and burning remains of some crater. And now we're getting a top-down view of the damage, I'm assuming. I'm not sure if they're still bringing in shots. But we can still see that they're focusing on the one smoldering crater that's caused these two little small fires down there on the forest floor. And we can actually see that actually looked like some kind of little Russian position, like a little observation post or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but that does look artificial. Let me know in the comments what y'all think. I think it may actually be a tractor of some sort. You can see that some of the trees have been felled. I'm not really sure if that's from the artillery fire or if that was done by the Russians themselves. But one thing that's always interesting to me about trees and how artillery fire works is that there's a lot of recounts in the Civil War of soldiers marching and a cannonball. Well, really at that time, I mean, they were really kind of becoming rifled. So I don't know what you like to call it, the shell or the cannonball. It doesn't really matter to me. Cannonball would rip through the tree line above them, and it would be splitting limbs and such from the trees right above them. And so if you couldn't really pay attention to the cannonball, you could pretty much clearly see its path because it was ripping everything apart through the tree line, which is really interesting. And it still looks like that may be happening today with modern artillery, although they're taking a less straightforward and direct path towards their target, and they're taking a more arch-shaped direction towards their target. Still a very interesting video to see. We can see here that this is some kind of video probably made by the Ukrainian forces where they're showing what the Russians have left behind. Borscht! They brought borscht with them. That's pretty crazy. Borscht is like a traditional Russian food, if none of y'all are aware of that. And so it's crazy to see that they brought along kind of like the Russian stereotypical food with them in jars of the stuff. I don't know if that's good looking borscht. I've never actually had borscht. But nonetheless, yes, these are the Ukrainians, and they're looking around the Russian positions that have now been left behind that they probably retreated from. And it looks like the artillery did, in fact, strip these trees apart when it landed and exploded, because you can see that these trees were kind of sheared apart by something of incredible force, which could only be artillery. And so we can also see here a Hyundai chainsaw. The Russians don't even trust their own chainsaw manufacturers, and they're now buying Hyundai chainsaws. Very interesting, and we can also see what looks like some webbing left over by the Russian units. So, really interesting stuff, but it's good to see the Ukrainians have once again given the Russians hell on another spot of the front line somewhere in the Donbass area. So we're now going to move on to Mariupol, where we've gotten loads of news today, some good, some bad. Can't really tell what's going on down there right now. But to start off with the largest amount of news, which may start giving us a really good picture of what's going on, depending on what this actually means, we've gotten news today that the 36th Brigade has joined the Azov in the defense. This was written by Pravda News, so I'm not really sure as to their credibility, but nonetheless, they say that the 36th Independent Brigade of Marines, named after Admiral Bolensky, have broken through to join the Azov regiment. I'm not sure what they mean by broken through, because I've heard some mixed reports that the Russians have actually divided the city in two, and they've somehow managed to reach the Kalmius River on the western side somewhere. And so I'm not sure if they mean broke through as in the 36th Independent Infantry was somewhere over here, and the Azov was over here in the Azovstal, and they managed to break through this Russian kind of like a split in their lines and rejoin with the Azov. I'm not really sure what that means, because it could also mean, because I have a lack of information and I'm not really able to say what it means exactly, I'm not really sure if they're saying the 36th Independent Brigade has literally driven from a marched or driven from a place like Volnovakha and somehow wound up in Mariupol and fought through the Russian kind of like encirclement of the city and rejoined with the Azov to strengthen their defenses. Because as the article goes on, they say that this has bolstered the defenses of Mariupol, and now the defenders have even more numbers. And so that suggests that they've come from outside of Mariupol, and if they have, I'm gonna answer this in both ways. If the Russians have managed to split the city in two and they broke through the Russian lines and managed to regroup with the Azov unit, that's good. That means that the city will hold for longer, but it's showing that the situation is dire and the amount of land they're holding is small. If the 36th Independent Brigade came from somewhere further up the line, somewhere near Volnovakha or Bilmak, and managed to march/drive down towards Mariupol, break through the cordon around the city, and then rejoin with the Azov to continue the defense, that could be nothing short of a miracle that they made it that far with so many forces intact that they're in fact bringing extra firepower and more reinforcements to the table. So I'm not really sure which one it is, but nonetheless, y'all can read more about the article. I read through it, and I really couldn't get a clear answer as to which one of those it was, but it's still good to know that there are strategic maneuvers still being conducted inside of Mariupol that will ensure that the city will hold for some time longer. Not really sure how much longer, but it's still good to know that that is the case. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news inside of Mariupol, where we can see Russian forces active inside of the left bank. I tried to pull up a map today of Mariupol and find out where the left bank district is, but unfortunately I couldn't get an answer to that, so the marker may or may not be accurate. Anyways, here's the video.
Только когда мы возьмем двор под контроль. А потом уже коробочку туда потянем.
С пухом, с Богом. Черт. Так, мы будем в дверь за мной. Да, все пошли. Как десятка, зигзагообразно, бегом туда.
Now we see the Russians running across the street. Of course, always something funny to me, and we saw this after our TikTok stars yesterday actually got hit in the ankle. We never hear Ukrainians firing at them, yet they run like there's someone down the street. Now, I'm not saying, that they're not on the front lines every single time, but it's always weird to me how we hardly ever hear any enemy fire in any of their videos. Although we have seen in a couple of instances that it may actually be the case that some of these videos have been filmed on the front lines where the Azov or the defending units like the 36th Independent Brigade have been fighting. So I'm going to let the video continue. So now the cameraman is running, but we know the cameraman won't come under fire because he's, the cameraman. So now he's made it into the building. So now we can see them having a light conversation, probably about how they're losing so bad and they're doing this for the film. We can now see him holding some kind of anti-tank weapon or something of that nature. He's now going to run out of the building. Actually, he's not really going to run out of the building. He's just going to let the he's just going to let the backblast spray everyone. He didn't even say backblast or anything. Like, if no one was paying attention, he would have just wandered up there. Someone could have walked behind him and gotten their head splattered by the backblast. Because as you can see, it was a pretty strong backblast from that thing. Jeez. And then, in the process of still trying to look cool, this wooden board fell in the way of him running back, and so he's trying to walk through it without tripping over it and looking stupid on camera. So take a look at that clumsy encounter right there. So now they're running once again around the city. Of course, no enemy fire coming at them, or not even the sound of gunfire in the distance. This guy actually sounds like he's already undergoing the process of having mesothelioma. He was probably with the Chechens that were active in the city yesterday in the videos, because he's got that cough that tells me that he may be getting a little sick. So anyways, we're gonna let the video continue. Now, you know, here's kind of the clown show stuff to me, okay? They all get in the building and they're trying to make it clear that they're trying to hide in the corners, which suggests that they're not really feeling safe from the right side of the screen, which is open ground. The cameraman is standing on the other side of the wall, where the open ground on the right side of the screen is, and he's filming the troops inside. So in a second he decides, oh, it may be smart for me to actually go inside, but that tells me that they're under no imminent danger, as you would think a cameraman would be trying to get in the safest place possible, considering he may be unarmed, and he may just be from the press. So I'm going to let the video continue. So now he gets inside. Now we hear a lot of bleeps, which tells me that they're once again having another friendly discussion. They're probably talking about their favorite game of chess. Now we can see another AT weapon being fired. This guy actually yelled backblast, unlike the last guy who actually had multiple people behind him inside of a building, where it probably would have been hard to get out of the way of the backblast. But yet this guy is in the wide open, no one around, and then he yells backblast. It's like it makes no sense as to when they say it or why. They just do it sometimes for the film. So nonetheless, that's the end of the video. And then you can actually hear something exploding in the distance, but we're not really sure what it was. And so now we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news here on the western side of the city, where we can see that the Azov has destroyed more units today. Of course, the Azov is probably on the eastern side. The markers aren't entirely accurate, but they did occur somewhere inside the city of Mariupol. We're not exactly sure where, though, because that information is hard, if not impossible right now for me to track down. But if a whole bunch of y'all sleuths, because I know there's a lot of people who can do geolocation incredibly well, can figure out where some of these events are happening in the comments and let Matthew know, I would actually love to know exact locations as to where this is happening. Anyways, here's the video. As you can see, there's a Russian vehicle right there. And as we give the video a little bit more time, we can see that it is no longer a Russian vehicle. And so that's the end of the video. Once again, good stuff to see. The Azov is giving the Russians hell still, and it's just incredible to think that they've been there for about 45 days now, which is a whole month and a half, and they're still managing to hold this city somehow. We just don't know exactly how well. Another thing I'd like to say is they have the 36th Independent Brigade, which I'm assuming was on the western side of the city near the port, has now relinked with the Azov. I don't understand how they're still fighting ongoing at the port as of yesterday, which was day 47 and was marked in blue. Wait a minute, I'm sorry, no, that would have been 2 days ago, which was marked in blue. I don't know how they would have retreated their forces so fast without the Russians overrunning them in the process of trying to move through the other Russian lines to regroup with the Azov, but I'm sure there is an explanation to that because, you know, the Ukrainians aren't going to lie about some kind of large maneuver like that. So anyways, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news that we've gotten inside Mariupol, where we can see separatists operating inside of Mariupol. Once again, it's pretty self-explanatory. This is apparently the 9th Regiment that's currently active inside Mariupol from one of the separatist countries. So it's either the Donetsk Republic or the Luhansk Republic. Nonetheless, here's the video. And also another thing I'd like to point out is that this looks like something from a World War II, well, not a World War II, a World War II movie about the Germans, you know, where it's like the end of the war and the German commander comes up and says, Jesus Christ, we got old men and, you know, young boys in the army now. Because this guy looks like he's 16 and this guy looks like he's got a senior citizen card, and they're both in the same place at the same time, which is telling you that the separatist forces don't really have a good pool of people to draw their forces from. Either they're too young or they're too old, at least in their appearance. So anyways, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news since we've seen that video, where we can see a BTR-82, and we've seen loads of this footage, but once again, we've seen another one active today inside of Mariupol. It may be the same one they're filming day after day, but I'm not entirely sure, and so I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt and say that this is the exact same, well, a different vehicle each time. So anyways, here's the video. So you see this BTR lighting up a building. Once again, we hear no enemy fire around. We hear no firefights. It's just firing at an empty building as far as we know. Looks like a tank also fired from over there. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. I forgot. Copyrighted music. Hopefully YouTube doesn't come down here and get me. You know, it's just that I'm so used to watching videos when I'm looking at this news, and I don't have to mute them, that sometimes it passes my, like, reflexes to mute them when I hear the music, and it's, like, slowly creeping and getting louder, and so it doesn't really register immediately. But nonetheless, the BTR-82 continues to fire into the building. Of course, as we heard, there was no fire going on at the first part of the video, and of course I can't tell you at the end if there is or isn't. We can't hear any audio at all. But once again, it's just a BTR-82 lighting up some buildings in Mariupol, and I'm very sure that they're probably abandoned and have no one inside at all. And so with that, we're now going to move on to, I believe, some of the last bits of news that we've gotten inside of the city today. First off, we've seen the red backpack man return, because we saw this guy with a red backpack a while ago on the stream, and now he's returned in another set of footage. As you see there, here's his red backpack. So we know that Red Backpack Man lives to see another day. Then we see a drone flying around and giving us drone footage of where Red Backpack Man is. So you can see there that there was a T-72B3 that fired into an unknown building. We can't see it on screen. And it's weird to me, of course, that there is no incoming fire. It's got its entire side exposed, so if there was infantry there, and we know that the Ukrainians use a large amount of ATGMs, it could be easily hit and disabled, considering that it's exposing its weaker side armor to this building. And also the cameraman appears, as far as we can see in frame, to be standing in the wide open somewhere near the tank, probably in view of the building it's firing at, and they're not concerned at all. So now we see more footage. Now they're panning around and showing the damage, and you can see that the buildings in Mariupol have been absolutely wrecked. There's not a single one left that looks like it hasn't been completely destroyed and completely gutted from the inside out. He just gave away their positions. He has the mesothelioma cough as well. I have a feeling that a lot of these guys, if they don't get it from the radiation in the Red Forest or the Azov or the Ukrainians, they're getting it from all the asbestos that they're kicking up in some of these buildings that we can generally assume are loaded with asbestos. And we're starting to notice, because I haven't noticed this before in a lot of videos, that a lot of the Russians, at least 2 or 3 of them we've seen just tonight, are starting to have coughs, which I believe is one of the signs of mesothelioma, if I am correct. But nonetheless, it's been incredible. You know, they just got exposed to it probably a week ago. I don't know if mesothelioma sets on that quick. But nonetheless, it is kind of weird that I noticed that they were in an asbestos-filled building that had asbestos particles floating all around. And now we're starting to hear more and more coughs on video. It's somewhat interesting. But nonetheless, I'm going to let the video continue. So now they're running across the open again. Of course, not receiving any fire. We hear no firefights in the background. Now we can see more drone footage. appeared that something fired inside of the smoke towards the building. I'm not exactly sure what or how. Now we can see something exploding and burning inside of the smoke. Not really sure what that is either. So now we can hear artillery fire. Now they're just panning around and showing the damage. The Russians are incredibly proud of the damage that they've wrought on this city. They love to just take panning shots of it. And I'm guessing that they show this to the Russian citizenry and they talk about how proud they are that the Russians are valorantly attacking the city over and over again and pretty much taking the whole entire thing to the ground. And so with that, that's the end of that video. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news inside of the city, where we can see a DPR tank in action inside of the city as well. This is showing, once again, I would like to say, this is showing, since a lot of video footage keeps on being uploaded, mostly from the Russian side in Mariupol. Considering at the beginning of the war, we actually saw a decent amount of footage. It was like a half and half split of Ukrainians uploading footage of Mariupol and the Russians uploading footage of Mariupol. Now we're seeing that the Ukrainians hardly upload footage at all from the city, if not any, from the actual front lines, and the Russians are sending out a lot. Regardless whether they're staged or not, this is giving me the idea that they're showing the Russian public that they are winning in Mariupol, which I believe they're only willing to do now if they know for sure that they are winning in that area. Because if they're not, that's going to be something really hard to explain to the public in Russia when they get a lack of news and people start saying, hey, I wanted to know, like, when we won Mariupol, when did that happen? And then they have to go, oh, you know, and, you know, come up with an explanation for it. So I think that the Russians are making some kind of ground and pushing back the defenders. But once again, I don't know how long the Ukrainians will hold, because there's a lot of factors at play. We know that the Azov is a freak of nature kind of unit. No unit I expect it to last this long in a modern day siege of a city where they get nearly no supplies. And they're still holding. So once again, I'm just going to let the video play. It's got copyrighted music. We're going to mute that. Anyways, you can see the tank firing. It looks like a T-72B3. So we can see it firing again and again. So that's really the end of the video. It's just showing the Russian tank, well, the pro-Russian tank, the DPR tank, firing into the city of Mariupol, much like we see in most videos. And so finally, we've gotten a little bit of news that appear to be around the city or maybe outside of it, but the Russians have captured some incredibly high-tech near Mariupol. The defenders of Mariupol relied heavily on this technology to make sure that they could hold this city for as long as possible. And so, at the end of all this news, I have to say that it looks like the defenders of Mariupol may have lost some very important technology today, that the Russians have been touting all over their media, saying that they have won a huge success against the Ukrainians and their struggle to hold Mariupol. So, without going on too long about what it is, hopefully I haven't worried all of y'all too much. I do think that the city will still hold, regardless whether the defenders have this technology or not, but the Russians have said that they have captured some high-tech technology that allows the Ukrainians to defend the coastline. And so here's the picture of what they've got. A spotlight. And they said it was a high-tech radar station, and all they captured was a spotlight. I'm telling you, you can't make up the kind of propaganda that the Russians do. It's just so silly. I mean, like, that is a spotlight. Uncover that lid on it, tilt it downwards, you look out to sea with a light. That's it. And they lie about that kind of stuff as well. So with that, we've actually reached all of the we've actually talked about all of the news that has occurred inside of the Donbass. And so before we move on to recapping, for some of the viewers who may have come in late, what happened with the Moskva, and it's going to be an incredibly quick summary, we're now going to answer 3 to 5 questions from the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so first up here we have a $28 donation from Stephen Mentier. Thank you very much for your donation. We very much appreciate it. Next up, we have a question from Will Riley, who says, the Moskva 16 Vulcan anti-ship missiles and the S-300s were designed to take out U.S. carriers. Dick Cheney has offered to take Putin hunting, but no response from him yet.
Well, one can only hope that Putin does take up that offer, because Dick Cheney is known for having an incredibly good and spotless hunting record when he takes out hunting buddies. So I thank you very much for the support, and that is true. I believe that the Moskva in its first iteration was kind of like a helicarrier in a way, but let me check that out. Let's look at some pictures, because I'm not sure if I'm thinking about the same Moskva or if that was an older version, but nonetheless... That's these. Okay, no, I'm sorry. I'm thinking about something different. Apparently, there's another ship, I believe, that's called the Moskva, because I pulled up pictures today, and it was called the Moskva, like helicarrier or something like that. And it was, I'm guessing it's their version of an assault ship in a way that was carrying helicopters and such. So it does look like the Slava class looked the exact same way when it was originally commissioned that it does now, or at least used to look. Now it's at the bottom of the sea, most likely on its side within the next day or so, so I don't think it looks like this anymore. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for your support, and that is true. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from John Dilly 1974, who says, here in Ohio, our National Guard, or Air National Guard, has been flying every day, which is very unusual. Wondering if anyone else living near an Air Force or A&G base has seen the same. Are we readying them for combat?
I'm not sure if we're readying them per se for combat, but I think that the situation is tense, and so they're making sure that their battle readiness is high. I do know, not to disclose a lot, but we do have a aerial refueling unit that is based out of an airport where we live, somewhere around here. And so we've actually seen a lot of activity from them, actually more activity from the tankers flying around than we've seen from commercial aircraft flying around at this particular airport. So I have seen that, we have noticed that, but I think they're just getting up to a state of readiness and making sure that they rehearse their drills and operations, so that way they can make sure that if anything does happen, they are ready. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to 2 more questions, and we're going to return to the news, and we're going to recover the Moskva again, and then cover the news from Kherson and the international news.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Ruben Coolidge, who says, if Putin was indicted for war crimes, could there be any attempt to detain him on Russian soil, or would he be essentially trapped in country?
He would essentially, I would assume, be trapped in country, although that probably wouldn't last too long. One, because he's the head of state over there, and you will have to eventually meet up with him somewhere, most likely, other heads of state, and discuss things. So I don't think, well, first off, if he was indicted for anything, there is no external power that could enter Russia and walk past the guards at the Kremlin to Putin and say, you're under arrest. No one has that kind of power. On paper they do, but if they actually tried that, they would be detained, shot, or something like that. So there's no way to actually indict him and then just go in there and arrest him. There is no power in the world that could do that. The only way you could do that is just to have him assassinated or defeat Russia in a war and hope that they never unleash their nuclear power, however much they have, onto the world, and then get him that way. So I think if that was to go through, he would just kind of be stuck in Russia, and he wouldn't really be allowed to leave unless if it was a country that was neutral or open to the Russians, like China, India, or Pakistan, or a country like that. So thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in a way as to what I think would happen in a situation like that. And so with that, we're going to move on to one more question from the chat, and then we're going to move on to the Moskva, recap that, and then go to the international news.
And next up is a $20 donation from Junebug72, who says, thank you, man. This is getting so complicated and stressful. I have some hope at the moment, but I can't speak how wish to keep this space safe. So Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini, and I can't agree. It is a little bit of a stressful thing, but I hope that my descriptions of the news does clarify it in a way and that does help out people get a bit of a clearer idea as to what's going on. I would, of course, like to pride myself again that the Russians did steal my map at a time, and it was pretty much a carbon copy of mine. I thought that was really cool. Of course, it was probably nothing more than mere coincidence. But one can only dream, you know. Maybe it was the case that they actually just copied my map. So anyways, I thank you all very much for the support, and I hope I did answer everyone's questions in a way. And so we're going to go over a quick recap, if everyone would like to just stick around real quick, of the Moskva for everyone. It's going to be about 2 minutes long. Earlier today, Ukrainian anti-ship batteries on the coastline of the Black Sea fired at the Moskva, which was some 70 miles or 100 miles from the coastline, with 2 Neptune Anti-Ship Missiles. Neptune Anti-Ship Missiles are domestic made inside of Ukraine, and so they're actually a homegrown kind of weapon. Both missiles appear, from what we have heard, to have hit the ship, which has caused a large ammo detonation somewhere on board, which has led to the entire crew abandoning ship, and now the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet is adrift at sea. We don't know when it will sink. We know that it will probably follow the timeline of the Vasily Baikov, so I'm assuming that the fires will burn the ship out and then the ship will keel over and sink in maybe 2 days or so. But nonetheless, that was the flagship of the Russian fleet that came and went within the span of a day today. So that was incredibly interesting. If you would like to read more about it, we do have news articles and pictures of the weapons used against the Moskva and the Moskva itself and these 3 little markers. So there's a link in the description below to the map, and you can go through and read that a little bit more in detail for everyone who came here a little bit late and didn't get that news. And so with that, we're now going to move on to Kherson, where we've heard on the live UA map that the Russians apparently have not learned a thing. This airport was supposed to be used by the Russians, and they used it as a large basing area for supplies, but the Ukrainians conducted a strike on it and pretty much destroyed all the supplies, vehicles, and equipment that had been staged at this airport. The Russians apparently went back there again and started to use the exact same airport with nearly the exact same layout of equipment and supplies, because today we've gotten information that the Russians have once again been attacked at the international airport, and there have been explosions there. So we're going to wait for more news in the coming days and see if the Russians literally didn't learn anything and repeated the exact same thing twice. And so with that, we haven't actually gotten any more news out of the Mykolaiv/Kherson area. It appears that the front line is stalled there, and the Ukrainians are making no progress as of now. So we'll just keep apprised of that situation and see how it develops. So we're now going to move on to the little bits of international news we've gotten today, where in St. Petersburg, we've seen some 100 ambulances with 100 Russian wounded trying to unload them at hospitals in the area just due to the amount of casualties in general that the Russians have been taking. And so here's that video. You see the ambulances lined up for what seems to be a mile with nothing but Russian wounded inside of them. So that's the end of that video, but you can tell that the Russians have been taking a large amount of casualties, both killed and wounded, and so it looks like the situation is something they really can't even hide anymore because the visible evidence to the public is just so apparent. And so I think their propaganda is going to start taking a shift, and they're going to start talking about these Ukraine, like, you know, I'm not saying that this is true, I'm saying that this is what they're going to say. These Ukrainian dogs, they're killing all of our wonderful boys who've gone over there and they're just innocent and happy-go-lucky, and we need to make sure they pay for this. I'm sure that's where the propaganda is probably going to start going. But anyways, it appears that the troop buildup on the Finnish border that we've seen on satellite footage is apparently not going over all too well with the Finns, because now today on a city tram, we can see that they're calling Putin a bitch. In Russian words for it. I believe that may actually be the Finnish spelling, but I'm not entirely sure. But anyways, that's its final destination, so I think that tram is on a good path. So, with that, we're now going to go to the last bit of news we've heard around the world, which I thought was incredibly good news today, and it's that the U.S. is once again giving more aid to the Ukrainians. The administration in charge has declared that another $800 million in aid will be sent in the defense of Ukraine. So, that is incredibly good news. You can read the article attached below. It just explains that in longer terms. But with that, we have actually reached the end of the news for today. So I hope everyone's enjoyed. If you're a new viewer to the channel, make sure to subscribe, and if you did leave in a question, hang around because we might actually answer it if it's just a normal question in the live chat. We try and get the best ones and answer those at the end. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so first up, we have an $18 donation from Andrew Parker, who says Russian warship effed itself.
That's true. That's true. And I thank you very much for the support. To answer that, it was actually the Moskva and the Vasily Baikal, from the information we've had, that were the ones that assaulted Snake Island in the opening days of the war. So now the Vasily Baikal has been sunk, and the Moskva is in the process of sinking. So both ships that conducted the famous attack on the Snake Island are now both sinking or have sunk in the Black Sea. So that's kind of fitting in a way, that while they managed to kill/capture 13 guys on Snake Island, they have lost 2 of the best ships in the Black Sea fleet. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have been paid a visit from the Sockeye Salmon. We have a comment from S. Moore putting in a $15 donation, who says, sorry to say, but my muse, Sylvia the blue-eyed sockeye salmon, has been eaten by a California sea lion. She asked, do you have more information on the Mozart Group, mission purpose, and funding?
Unfortunately, I don't really have any information at all about the Mozart Group, sadly. We try and get all the information we can about everything going on in the war, but of course there is a lot of stuff going on, and I just haven't really seen a lot of information published in the first place about the Mozart Group. So sadly, I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one, because I don't want to try and just, act like I know it all. I don't know it all, and especially on that one, I haven't really heard much about them. So I'm sorry about that, and I'm also sorry to hear that Sylvia the sockeye salmon has been eaten by a sea lion. She will be gone, but never forgotten. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $15 donation from Daniel Nusk, who says, urgent, you have disclosed your Wi-Fi SSID, your IP address and physical location can be tracked using it. I highly advise someone who have received death threats to cover that up.
Give me just a second. Let me check that out real quick. So, the stream is starting soon, quote unquote, but not really. It doesn't look like I gave that away. It just showed the names of the Wi-Fi routers. So I don't think that there was any information that was exposed there that was dangerous. But I do thank you for letting us know. And we are looking at using a VPN. We actually did have a sponsor before from a VPN, and so I might just return and get their services in a way, because I actually sold myself on the product when they reached out to me. But anyways, with that being said, we're now going to move on to the next question. And thank you once again for the support.
All right, and next up here we have a super chat from Alan, who puts in a $20 donation. He says, thank you very much. When is your video coming out?
Okay, so that's a great question, and the answer is we're not entirely sure right now. It was supposed to come out Monday, but we edited out the video. We sat down and we looked at it, and I wasn't really impressed with it. And Matthew wasn't really all too impressed with it in the end. So we decided that we're actually going to scrap all of that footage, because we went into this video with an idea, and then once we started looking into the information that we were covering, we're like, wow, not only did we really cover it in a way that we weren't really all too happy with, but we found a whole bunch of new information that really requires us to go in another direction with this news. So, unfortunately, we really don't know. We're once again going to probably be filming on the weekend, again, this upcoming weekend. So I thank you for the support, and we will try and keep everyone updated as to when the first video will come out. Hopefully it'll be much sooner rather than like a month down the road or so. Hopefully it'll only be like a few weeks from now, maybe 2 weeks or so. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope you look forward to it, because it's going to be a really good video. We're more hyped up about the kind of like the new format and the new version we're going to be going with instead of the old one. And so I thank you so much once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $12 donation from Dean Turnbull, who says, magnificent work, fellas. Go the Bushmaster, Dino Dundee from Down Under.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy the work here at the channel. We try and put as much effort into it as possible, and I hope that the news was incredibly good tonight. This time, I actually didn't try and go through a format where I went from left to right. I tried to paint the story, and I think I kind of lost that on some of the videos before, because I used to do that at the very beginning, and it's very important to try and paint the stories that we're seeing coming out of the video footage over the course of those areas and days. So I thank you so much for the support. I'm glad you do enjoy it. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Praise Adonai, who says, Putin threatened to start shelling Kiev today if Ukraine persists. Has Ukraine received the support they need to counterattack on all fronts? Is this too little too late?
I don't believe there's such a thing as too little too late. We've seen that the Ukrainians put up such a staunch resistance in the northern and northeastern fronts that the Russians have completely withdrawn from those areas. So we know for sure that that's not the case. We know down here in the southeastern front, while they may suffer a tougher time, I think that they'll actually manage to pull everything together, because the Russians are using the exact same failing tactics down in the southeast that they used in the north, which completely devastated their front lines and their logistical situations behind them. So I thank you very much for the support. That's kind of my answer, but once again, take that with a grain of salt, because it's really just a bunch of assumptions that are kind of like compiled through the information that we've been getting over the past 50 days nearly. So as the days go on, I feel like that kind of like disclaimer isn't really needed, because some of the things, well, actually, I think a large amount of the things, around 70% of the things I've said, have turned out to be true, even in light of other people on YouTube saying otherwise. Like the 40-mile-long convoy thing, I said that destroyed their logistics entirely, and then there was other YouTube channels that were saying, in fact, that's going to make their logistics lines better. And then in the end, we found out that it destroyed their logistics, and that's why that front kind of fell apart in a way. It was due to those kinds of poor planning operations. So hopefully I'm once again correct, but then again, there is the chance that I am wrong. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Ferdy R, who says, God bless England. They sent them those anti-ship missiles.
They did. They're sending them harpoons at the moment. Not the Neptunes. The Neptunes were made and manufactured by the Ukrainians, but they are sending them harpoons, which will definitely help them to bolster the numbers of anti-ship missiles that they have in their supply. On top of that, it appears that the harpoon anti-ship missiles may be aircraft launched only, because as far as I could find online, I couldn't find any ground-based batteries that could fire harpoon anti-ship missiles. So I thank you very much for the support, and that is true. And I got to say, I've got to thank Britain so much. They've been showing and giving a lot of support to Ukraine, and that's a very good thing. And so with that, we're now moving on to the next question. But before we do, how many super chats do we have left, Matthew?
So let's see here. We have about 15.
All right. And with that being said, on to the next question.
And the next one is a $10 donation from Ari T, who says, this is no joke. I started demoing my bathroom today and found some newspaper in the wall. August 21st, 1991. Only part of the headline I can read says, Soviets abandon ship. The Matrix is glitching.
Yes, it is. And that's really crazy. That's really weird. That's kind of like one of those freak occurrences that makes you think you're in the Twilight Zone. But yeah, the Russians abandoned the ship again today. So you might want to take a picture of that and post it somewhere, because I'm sure a lot of people will probably find that really weird and interesting that you came across a newspaper saying that from 1991, and the exact same thing is happening again today. And so I thank you so much for the support, and that's a really interesting story you shared with us. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Turbo B18C1, who says, the Russian ship was destroyed, was a destroyer or a cruiser. I think cruisers are considered smaller / less powerful than destroyers.
I think that was a battle cruiser. Let's pull that up. Slava class cruiser. Oh, that says cruiser. That's pretty much answers the question. It's a guided missile cruiser, kind of like the Ticonderoga class, I believe, here for the U.S. Ticonderoga class cruiser. I believe most of these have been decommissioned. I believe they're still in the process of decommissioning a few of them, but there's not as many left as there originally were. But this ship actually kind of, I guess you could say, fills the same role that the Moskva class fills for Russia. but nonetheless, this is a cruiser. And in the Russian classification, and in normal naval classifications, a cruiser is larger and more powerful than a destroyer. It goes in this order from most powerful to least powerful. Aircraft carriers, battleships, heavy cruisers, actually just cruisers in general. We're not going to divide them up. Cruisers, destroyers, frigates, corvettes, and minesweepers. That's kind of like the general order of which ones are more powerful than the other from top to bottom. But I do thank you very much for the support, and it is in fact a cruiser. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is a $10 donation from Leaf Spring Army, who says, amazing news on the destruction of the flagship Moskva. The Russians are up against modern-day Spartans and Vikings.
I do entirely agree. And it's also incredibly impressive to me that they've managed to wipe out the flagship of the Russian fleet. That's something you would hear in a propaganda reel. That's something that you would never think you'd hear in real life. And considering that the Russians had practically confirmed it by saying there was a small fire on board and the entire crew abandoned ship, that does tell you that the situation is incredibly dire, because a crew complement of a ship doesn't abandon ship over a small fire, and in fact, all of them. That tells you that the ship has been almost completely destroyed and is irreparable and it's irrecoverable. So I do thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another super chat from Praise Adonai, who says, is Turkey still stopping Russian ships from access to the Black Sea?
I don't think they're stopping them from having access to the Black Sea. They're stopping, I believe, Russian ships from passing through the Istanbul Strait and entering the Black Sea. So I think that move is to stop the Baltic fleets and also the, I believe the North Sea, Barents Sea fleets, I believe is the proper name for them, of coming around pretty much the continent of Europe and then passing through the Istanbul Strait and bolstering the naval power that they're able to levy here in the Black Sea. I think that was the main goal of that. It's not exactly stopping Russian ships from operating in the Black Sea. It's just stopping more ships from entering there. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a brief way. And so with that, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from Will Riley, who says, speaking of quotes, Putin should have paid attention to the great U.S. poet Mike Tyson, who said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. This was said after the Buster Douglas fight.
Man, I thought you was a nice guy, man, but you're really just a rat piece of shit, man. You're just a rat piece of shit. Anyways, man, I thank you so much for the support. Yeah, honestly, Mike Tyson is unhinged, but whenever you see him just talking on a radio show, he does seem like a nice guy, kind of, in a way, in a weird way. But anyways, I thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from Tom Norkunas, who says, what are the odds that the Moskva was really hit by Harpoon missiles from Britain and the Neptunes are just a cover story?
I think it wouldn't be a cover story, you see, because we know that javelins are destroying Russian tanks, and there's never a cover story to how those Russian tanks are being destroyed. It's clear and obvious they're being destroyed by Western weapons. So I believe it is 100% true that it's the Neptune Anti Ship Missiles that hit that ship instead of harpoons. I believe the harpoons are still on the way of being shipped over there. So I hope that does answer the question in a brief way, because we haven't actually gotten any news or information that Ukrainian air units are being outfitted with Harpoon anti-ship missiles. So I hope that does answer the question in a way. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. And I'm looking down in the comments, and I see a lot of people laughing, so I'm guessing that everyone got a good laugh out of me and Matthew impersonating Mike Tyson. I get a lot of fun out of that. Actually, we get a lot of laughs here at home because I actually do that a good bit. But I do like Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson seems pretty cool. So anyways, thank you all for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is another question from Leaf Spring Army, who says, been thinking about the discussions around the use of Allahu Akbar. I think they use it as a prayer for good luck, just like you blow on dice at a craps table, but in a war context.
Could you kind of break that one down to me? I think I didn't really catch that first part.
So let's see here. So they're saying, they're talking about what you were discussing yesterday about the people yelling Allah Akbar running into battle. And they're basically just saying they used it as a prayer for good luck, basically.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought for some reason he was talking about the Moskva. I was like, what? But I do thank you very much for clarifying that. We actually had a lot of comments clarifying that in the comment section of the last video, which I read, and I do thank everyone for kind of clarifying that because I've heard it a lot, of course, over the years, but I have never actually gotten an answer as to why they do that. So I thank everyone for kind of answering that in a way. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from Cesar Lopez II, who says the Marine Battalion was holding the left flank of the city. Azov holds the right flank, and a tank battalion held the north area of the city. All three battalions have been there since the start of the war.
I did know that there wasn't just the Azov in there. I made that clarification a while ago, but I wasn't sure who. And I thought I remembered and kind of recalled a little bit that it may have been the 36 that was in there, but I didn't want to say anything like that today for certain because I was like, what if I get that wrong? What if they actually did manage some kind of unbelievable feat and they managed to break through the lines and get all the way to Mariupol? So I didn't want to discredit them from that, but I do thank everyone for clarifying that for me so that way I know that they have been there since the start, and it's a good thing to know that they have consolidated their defenses and hopefully will be able to hold the city for much longer. And so I thank you very much for the support and the answer to that. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from DC90, who says Russian Asbestos Battalion is what you have in Mariupol.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. And I think we're going to start seeing that pop up a lot more after this war. And I'm sure that that's going to become kind of a social issue in Russia, kind of like how Agent Orange became a thing for the Vietnam vets. Asbestos exposure and poisoning will become a thing for the Russians after this war is over, especially for the ones who were involved in the fighting down in that basement in Mariupol from what we saw. So I thank you very much for the joke. Do like it. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, I want to recognize a $10 donation from Hoodoo, Texas, and an $8 donation from longtime channel supporter Speedbreak. Thank you both for your donations to the channel. We very, very much appreciate it. Next up, we have a $10 donation from longtime channel supporter Trademarks and Patents for Growing Businesses. He says, did you hear about the drone that crashed in Croatia carrying a bomb from Ukraine? It lost control and flew all the way over. Can you Google it?
Wait a minute, what? It was flying from Croatia, it lost control and flew all the way over, but where?
Not really sure.
Can you reread that one entirely for me again real quick? Because maybe I'm just misunderstanding it a little.
So he said, did you hear about the drone that crashed in Croatia carrying a bomb from Ukraine? It lost control and flew all the way over.
I have not heard about that, and I feel like if that was something that the Russians were managing to fly, first off, I think that'd be a record-setting flight for a drone, because from the border of Ukraine all the way to Croatia, from probably the shortest distance we can measure, which would be right here, that is a whole 900-mile trip. I don't think that a drone, I may be wrong, but I don't think a lot of drones have that kind of distance on them. I may be wrong. But if that actually flew over Hungary and Romania or Slovakia or Poland, that is NATO airspace. And so I think they would have detected that and freaked out because that thing would have had to have a decent amount of flight time over any area of NATO territory, and everyone would have been like, oh my god, there's a Russian drone that's armed flying over NATO territory. So I haven't heard about that, and I'm not entirely sure if it's true, but I will look into it and see if it is. So I thank you so much for the support, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to mention that Trademarks just mentioned that that was actually not his question. And I was thinking when I was reading it, that didn't sound like what I recall copying and pasting over to the spreadsheet. So here's his actual question. He said, did the Russians withdraw across the Dnipro River as shown on the map?
They haven't withdrawn across the Dinipro River on the map. They actually do hold Kherson and Nova Kakhovka, which is a hydroelectric power plant up here. But I think that they are actually in a pretty good defensible position right here because we haven't seen this front line move at all over the course of about a week and a half. So it looks like the Ukrainian counterattack managed to push them away from Mykolaiv, but it has not uprooted them from Kherson and Nova Kakhovka. So they have not, in fact, withdrawn onto the other side of the river And it doesn't show that on the map as well, but hopefully one can dream that the Ukrainians will be able to manage doing that, which will cut off the Russians from ever having the possibility of shooting outwards into western Ukraine that's on the other side of the Dnipro River. So I thank you very much for the support, Trademarks and Patents. You've been here for a while, and we do appreciate all the support that everyone gives. It does help us to run the channel. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another one from Will Riley, who says the ambassador from Ukraine met with the folks from General Atomics, the maker of the Predator, and they are prepared to ship equipment to the Ukraine immediately with government approval, of course.
Well, that sounds incredibly good. I'm glad to hear that that is the case. It does seem like Ukraine does require a large amount of drones. It is something, though, we have not seen Zelensky ask for on his videos. He's starting to ask for ground equipment like artillery and such things like that. And so I think they have the drone situation largely under control. Of course, more equipment is always better regardless of what kind it is. But it's always good to hear that more drones and more equipment like that will be sent over. So I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that you did share the info with us because we didn't know that on stream. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is a $10 donation from Rich Hogan, who says, great stream as always, and keep up the hard work.
Well, thank you very much. And I just saw something in the chat here. Someone in the chat said, and let me read this to you, Matthew. Maybe you can do a little bit of looking. Someone said Mark Felton is here. So
Mark Felton?
Yeah, Mark Felton is one of the larger history YouTubers. I actually hold him in incredibly high regard, and if he is watching, I do love your videos. They're incredibly well made and very informative. And if you were watching this stream, that is incredibly cool. So if you could look through the chat, Matthew, and see if we do see Mark Felton in here somewhere, that would be insane to know that we were having such distinguished YouTubers like him watching our content nightly. So thank you so much for notifying us of that, if that is true, because I can't look at the chat all too much. But with that, we're now going to move on to the next question. Hopefully Matthew can see if Mark Felton is in here over the process of us answering questions.
Yeah, I don't see him in here. Maybe people are just mentioning his name potentially, or either I'm missing him, one or the other. But no, I don't see him in here right off the bat. But anyways, next up we have a $5 super chat from Adam Lee Fox, who says maybe next week the Ukraine will start capturing Russian warships. I'm sure the Ukrainian farmers will want in on that action, and Slava Ukraine.
Oh, yes, I can entirely agree with that. I think the Ukrainians are going to have... Well, the Ukrainians are an incredibly industrious people. We've seen that so far. I would assume that the Ukrainian farmers will probably equip some paddles to the wheels of their tractors and remove the fenders so that way they can work like paddle boats and attach some pontoons to their tractors so that way they could swim out there in a way to the Moskva if it's still floating and bring its burning husk into Odessa or Mykolaiv for a refit so that way it could enter Ukrainian service after the war is over, or a lucky farmer will keep it for himself. I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is a $20 donation from Greg Carman, who says, confused about different reports from Mariupol. Is any report real? Seems to be critical.
I think he was talking about Mariupol and reports from there.
Let's see. Talking about, reports from Mariupol. He wants to know if there's any real report.
There are not really real reports per se about the front lines and the actual situation inside of Mariupol. That's kind of unknown. Of course, I have to cover, and this hasn't been said for a long time, there is a fog of war. And so while my maps have been proven almost all the time to be accurate down to the mile nearly on what's happening inside of Ukraine, there are, of course, errors. And for example, Mariupol is a huge error. I don't actually know if the front line in that city looks like this. This is all a rough approximation from where we confirm Russian troops are and where Ukrainian troops are defending. And so this front line may be much larger or much smaller from what we know. So we don't have any hardcore reports in terms of that. We just get little tidbits of news like tanks operating in certain areas, and then we see videos of Russians in certain parts of the city that can be definitely confirmed, and then we can say, okay, the front line has moved like this. So in terms of hardcore reports that just lay out the literal situation, we don't have any of those, and I haven't seen any of them yet. And so I thank you very much for the support and the question, and I hope that does clarify that for you. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from a longtime channel supporter, George, New York's premier contractor, who says many Ukrainian refugees are coming to the U.S. If you'd like to help them, please Google Ukrainian church in your area. They really need your help. Slava Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much for the support. And could you tell me again what group he's talking about? Because I don't think I caught it. I'm trying to look down at the chat because it looks like things blew up for a small part.
He just basically said to help out your local Ukrainian church in your area, since there's so many Ukrainian refugees coming to the United States.
I do entirely agree. I would like to help one out, but as far as I know, and I'll have to look, in my city, I think the closest thing we have to a Ukrainian Orthodox Church is a Greek Orthodox Church, which isn't similar at all, really. And of course, I don't think they'll probably be accepting Ukrainian refugees. But then again, a lot of churches, at least here in the South, because it is the Bible Belt, do everything they can to really help anyone and everyone out. So I will look into that and see who is helping them out, and if we have any Ukrainian Orthodox churches around here, and if so, maybe look into supporting them. And so I thank you so much for the support and giving me the little tidbit. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Bob A., who puts in a donation of $10. He says, Enforcer, a drone crashed near Zagreb, Croatia, around 15th of March, crossed Romanian and Hungarian airspace without reaction. Report is in Reuters, Euronews, and all other major news sources.
Huh, well, I didn't ever hear about this story. And you said it happened on March 1st?
March 15th.
March 15th. Okay, that was an entire month ago. I never heard about that story. I have never reported it on this channel. And so I thank you very much for sharing that with me, but I think that fell out of the scope of like the Ukraine frontline news in a way for me that day. There was loads of news coming out a month ago. And so it like there's still loads of news coming out now. I have to still pick and choose, but back then there was literally a never-ending stream of news, and so I try and cover the most important things I found. But of course, a lot of things back then, just due to the amount of time I can use on a stream, would have to pass through, and so I don't think that was included, and I don't actually ever think I heard about that. So I thank you very much for sharing that with me. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from Kevin Scott 76, who says, we were both right. The Saturn V standing in Huntsville is a replica. The real one is on its side in a museum to protect it. I'm glad you saw it.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And yes, that is in fact true. And it's really cool that they actually have an entire Saturn V dissected into its stages inside of that building. I think it's one of the few, if not the only one of its kind in the nation. And so I highly suggest that everyone goes and checks that out if you're ever driving through the Alabama area, because it is one hell of a sight to see one of the rocket that took men to the moon just taken apart for you to see. Very interesting, and it's massive. And so with that being said, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from longtime channel supporter Lilith Embers, who says, does Russian appointment of General Alexander, Vornikov, I believe is how it's pronounced, mean that we're likely to see other eastern and coastal cities suffer similarly or worse than Mariupol?
I'm not entirely sure. There's not really a lot of coastal cities anymore that are under direct threat from the Russians or on some kind of front line. For example, Bryansk has been completely captured. Kherson is still within Russian control, and so they're not really trying to push into the city, they're trying to hold it. And so I don't really think a lot more coastal cities are under the threat of being leveled. I think the only one that would be under the threat would be Odessa, and then even at that, now with the anti-ship missiles, we know that most Russian ships will not be able to operate to the full capacity that they were able to prior. And also Mykolaiv is, of course, taking fire daily nearly, from what we can see in footage, but it's not taking the level of fire where you would say it's close enough to a front line where they're actually trying to push it. So I don't really think any cities on the coast will be suffering as much as Mariupol. I think Mariupol is a little bit of an exception. And also, I think if I'm remembering the correct guy here, that guy is known as like the Butcher of Aleppo or something like that. And he's known to be pretty much a war criminal in a way. So I thank you very much for the support. That's kind of my answer based off of all the information and circumstances we have. And so with that being said, I thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a comment from BSG Wolf, who says, borscht is a Ukraine dish.
Really? I didn't know that. I thought it was Russian. Let me pull that up real quick. Borscht, borscht soup. Borscht recipe. Let's see. let's see, most often associated with the soup's variant of Ukrainian origin, made with red beetroots as one of the main ingredients. Uh, the same name is used for a wide selection of sour-tasting soups with beetroots, such as sorrel-based, green borscht, rye-based borscht. I didn't know that. For this whole entire time, I thought this was Russian. Kind of like well, now I'm scared to say that kompot is Russian or chebureki or anything like that, because this isn't Russian, this is Ukrainian. But I thank you so much for sharing that info with me, because I didn't have I thought this was Russian. And so I thank you very much for sharing that with me. That's very interesting information to know. And I would like to try that because it just looks really interesting to me. It's red beets. So it looks kind of like tomato soup with large chunks in it. And then it's got a sour cream dollop on it in this picture. So it looks like a very interesting dish to try in the future. Hopefully I'll try it out. But I thank you very much for clarifying that for me. And so with that being said, thank you once again. And we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another $10 donation from Bob A, who says, Enforcer, is any additional news on that drone just came out as confirmed to contain explosives? Neither side has claimed ownership, and drone is a 1970s unmanned reconnaissance aircraft like a small jet.
Interesting. I don't really know a lot about that incident once again, but I do thank you for sharing the information with us, so that way we can have a more clear picture as to the story of what happened there. Considering that it was a month ago, I really can't cover it because the amount of time that's passed in between now and then is just so long that I wouldn't want to try and include that as a news story, because a lot of people would be like, oh, that's a month old, so, but I thank you very much for sharing that info with us. It is, of course, helpful to know. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from Samulis, who says, Borscht is Ukrainian and Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini, and I think that's going to be the next Leaf Springs right there. Hopefully not, because that one is just honestly like an honest mistake. I knew it was an Eastern European dish, but I didn't know it was Ukrainian. So I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a super chat from Ninos GLG, who says, do you think it may be possible the U.S. Special Ops might be operating the drone attacks from outside Ukraine?
I don't really think so. You see, the thing is that might be something easy to track. I'm not entirely sure, but if it is, that would lead to the U.S. Being directly involved in the war, which could lead the Russians to say, we're going to war, or something of that nature. The Russians have done that historically in the past. For example, Russian pilots operated MiG-15s painted up in North Korean colors during the Korean War. So we know that is something that's happened historically as far as the Soviet Union operating foreign weapons and such. But I don't know if the U.S. would go to that length, because that could lead to us being directly put into the war in a way. So I thank you very much for the support, and that's kind of my assessment of the situation. And so with that being said, we're moving on, to the next question.
And the next one is a $20 donation from Mac Millies, who says, long live Cossack Gundy, aka Aiden, support Ukraine.
Thank you very much for the support, and I do agree with you as well. Slava Ukraini. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Samulis again, who says, have you seen how gorgeous Mariupol was before savage Russians attacked it? Looked up the pics and rip Mariupol.
I actually have shown that on stream before, like drone footage and such of Mariupol before the war, and I do have to say that a lot of the Ukrainian cities, including Kharkiv, Kharkiv, let me say that correctly, but they were very pretty before the war, and I hate to see that they've gone through such damage. But much like everything, much like a forest that goes through fire, stuff will regrow from the ashes, and it'll be as pretty or even prettier than it was before, hopefully. One can only dream. And so I thank you so much for the support, and I have seen that. And with that being said, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Jesse Weinert, who says, I need you guys to make some red Backpack Man shirts for me. I've been watching from day 4 to 5, and I'm loving it.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and a lot of people have been watching since day 4. That was actually when this channel blew up. The 3 days before that, I actually was getting I think 1,000 views or 100 views a video or so. It wasn't really high at all compared to what we get even now, after the spike of people who are interested in Ukraine has dropped off, and we're kind of getting down to lower numbers, it was still incredibly low. And so a lot of the first time viewers on kind of like the old guard, you could say, came in on day 4. So it's impressive to know that you've been around since then. And I thank you so much for enjoying our news that much. So I thank you for the support. And that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up is a comment from BSG Wolf, who says, I have seen more activity from the C5 Galaxies at Joint Base Lewis McChord here in Washington.
Well, I thank you very much for sharing that information with us. Let's see, C5 Galaxy, I know what that is, but McChord Air Base, I know I'm probably spelling that wrong. Let's see, McChord Field. It's in the south of Tacoma, so let's see where that is on the map. That kind of looks like it's near Seattle, or Olympia. I'm not really sure which one. Let's see here. It's been open for quite a while. Here's a satellite view of the airport. It does look like they operate a lot of large transport aircraft out of there. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that info with us. That's interesting to know, and I wonder what they are operating for, or if they are transporting anything, because they're most likely being used as of now. So I thank you so much for the support, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And our next super chat is from Dino Res, who puts in a $20 donation and says, the drone that crashed in Zagreb, Croatia is an old Soviet recon armed Tupolev 141 drone that was decommissioned by Soviets in 1989. It was recommissioned in Ukraine since 2014. Not saying it was Ukrainian, but just stating facts.
Very interesting. Well, I thank you very much for the support, and we pulled it up right here. This is the Tu-141, which is very interesting. I didn't know that the Russians actually had any drones in 1979. What was it used for? A reconnaissance drone. Okay. Historically served with Soviet Army as well as Ukraine Armed Forces since 2014. So I'm guessing that they pulled these back out of the woodworks and started to use them after the Donbass conflict. So I'm assuming that it probably was Ukrainian, and that's why, now that we got this information, that's why no one really freaked out, because it was just a Ukrainian drone that was out of control, and they probably relayed the information that, hey, this is flying over your airspace, it's ours, but it's out of control, we've lost connection to it, or something like that, and it's just flying until it runs out of fuel. So I thank you very much for the support and sharing that information with us. It does give us a bit of a clearer story on what that drone was doing. So I thank you once again so much for the support. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from That Frost Wolf, who says, Pootler's probably so angry about his ship sinking, he squeezed his eyeballs out of his rubber ducky.
Yeah, I have to agree. And something I've been seeing as a joke around is that that apparently the admiral of this fleet has to have a glass bottom boat to see his fleet. And at this point, I have to say that's true. The Ukrainians have destroyed, I think, two of the most powerful or the best ships, either classifier, in the Black Sea Fleet. The Vasily Baikov, which was their most modern and up-to-date corvette. And now they've destroyed the Moskva, which is literally the flagship cruiser of the Black Sea Fleet. That's insane, really, when you think about it. The Ukrainians have managed to pull off such a feat and a victory in a way. But I thank you very much for the support, and I do think he's probably popping the eyes out of the admiral that led to that happening as well. But anyways, with that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from General Ralph, who says, how's the weather in Montgomery? And we actually don't live there.
We actually don't live there. We live at... That's censored. So I thank you very much for the support. We do live in Alabama. It's just that I don't want to say where, because there are crazy people out there. And while I'm totally fine with them trying to come and get me, I don't really want to advertise that where I'm playing some kind of battle royale out here and just trying to fight for my life. So I thank you very much for the support. Unfortunately, I'm not going to dox myself. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from Honest M, who says, did you hear about the drone that crashed in Croatia? Let's see here. That is the question that I originally asked that you've already answered. So Honest M, thank you very much for your $5 donation. That got mixed up with Trademark's question, so we've already answered it. So moving on to the next one, we have from Patrick McHugh, who puts in a $5 donation. He says, listed to come from the U.S. Navy to Ukraine are unmanned coastal defense vessels. Any idea what these could be?
Let's see here. Let's pull that up. U.S. unmanned coastal defense vessels. maybe there's an answer to this. Unmanned vessel plans needs improvement. You know, honestly, Matthew, like kind of an aside to you, this kind of sounds like the M5 system on Star Trek, you know, in the original series where the guy was like, the M5 can control the starship. It kind of sounds like that, and it doesn't really look like it's actually come to fruition at the moment, and it's in testing. Because we don't actually have, it looks like, any pictures even of these unmanned ships, except for maybe this one. I don't know, though, if these have been produced. We don't have a lot of information, and it looks like from just typing it in, there's not a lot of public information about these things. So thank you very much for the support. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to plead ignorance because I don't think there's enough information to talk about this. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Pratik Ghosh, who says, been watching since day 3. Keep up the great work. The Enforcer and all the mods. Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy what we do at the channel. It takes a long time to do, and we put a lot of effort into it, and I'm just so glad that a lot of people do appreciate it. And so with that being said, I thank you so much, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Jonathan White, who says, never stand in the way of the Cossacks and their freedom. You might lose tanks and ships. Slava Ukraine and Slava to the Cossack nation.
Well, I thank you so much for agreeing with me that the Cossacks are an incredibly resilient group of people. They do love their freedom historically, and so we can see that the Russians are starting to lose a little bit of everything. And I think, honestly, that the destruction of the Moskva and the sinking of it in the oncoming days will probably lead the Russians back into the negotiation table, because how many Slava class. Yeah, that's right, Slava class cruiser. How many of these were even built? Completed 3. There's only 3 of these made, and one of them has sunk. It looks like one of them was laid up, so the construction of it was incomplete. But 3 of them were active. One of them sank, and the only operators of them is the Russian Navy. And so we know for sure that they've lost literally 33% of their Slava-class cruisers in one day. So I think that may lead them back to the discussion table. And once again, how much does a Slava-class cruiser cost? Coast. Boy, that's rough. Anyways, let me go back through here. Maybe we got a price tag on this thing. Armament, armor. Oh, come on. Someone's got to tell me, right? Like, how much this thing costs. Let's see. There's a long delay. Oh, man, there's got to be... Come on, like, they're not telling me that they don't know the cost of this thing, right? There's got to be some kind of public number. How many Slava, let's see how much a Ticonderoga costs. $1 billion. So that's how much a Ticonderoga. Sorry, I've just realized I've been mispronouncing that. So that's how much that one of those costs. So if we assume that that Slava class also cost $1 billion to produce each, then the Russians just lost $1 billion in one go. So thank you very much for the support. It looks like they're taking quite a beating out there at sea and on land from these Cossacks. So I thank you once again. And with that being said, we're now moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $2 donation from Paul Redman. And we also have a $20 donation from Freedom First. Thank you very much to both of you for your donations to the channel. And as always, it is very, very much appreciated. So let's see here. Next up, we have a question from Zero J Kwan, who says, Enforcer, yes, it is true. Mark Felton made a video about the drone Tu-141 crashing in Croatia. Any chance USA will give jets to Ukraine, now with Finland?
I just don't know. I mean, like, the thing is that the Russians are very clear that flying aircraft into Ukraine will be the start of a war. And so I think the United States is not really wanting to start one or really get to the point where it's literally just minutes away. So I'm not entirely sure if they will do that, even with the Finnish situation developing as it is. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in a way. And we had a little bit of a stir about Mark Felton being in the chat. I don't know if he was. Maybe he'll reach out to me on email if he still is. But nonetheless, if Mark Felton said it, it's true. I mean, like, you know, the guy honestly puts out the best content. It may be a week or two behind when it happened, you know, a week or two after it happened, but when he puts something out, you guarantee that that is some quality information that he's putting out. Got a lot of respect for him. If anyone's doing anything good in the history arena, and kind of like the current events arena now, it's him. So thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And our final super chat of the night is from Dino Ress, who puts in a $10 donation and says, I'd be happy to serve as behind the scenes research for mods on questions for Enforcer and Matthew if such a service is needed. Just send me a few leaf springs each month for payment.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, but we generally have everything under control right now in the background. But if we do need help, I'll make sure to reach out to you. And I thank you so much for the kind offer. That really was nice of you. And so I thank you so much. And with that being said, if that was our last super chat, on to the live.
Actually, we have one more actually.
All right. Also, real quick before we answer that, I was just looking at the comments, and someone said the Vasily Baikov has not been sunk. I'm going to show you this. This is going. I don't mean to talk demeaningly because everyone's always like, oh, you know, don't talk to me demeaningly, but I'm not. But here's the thing. Wait a minute. Hang on. You might. Operational history. Hang on. Island on Russian. Saying the ship have been heavily damaged. However. Wait a minute. Hang on. Are you kidding me? Wow. Somehow, the whole entire story... Okay, that's the first bit of massive propaganda we've seen from the Ukrainian side, which now is making me question the Moskva, that this thing actually is still existing and traveling around. It wasn't killed by MLRS systems. It's still there, so... That's really interesting, and that was something I noticed. And now, I'm not trying to save face here, but I did say when we watched the video of the ship burning at sea, that doesn't really look like the Baikov. But then once everyone pretty much came out and said, yeah, it was the Baikov, I was like, okay, it must have been the Baikov. But looks like I got the wool pulled over my eyes on that one. So I thank you very much. Actually, my mind was blown right there. So I guess I got to eat a little bit of humble pie myself every once in a while. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I actually didn't know that the Baikov was still alive. So I thank you very much for that. And with that being said, we're now moving on to the last super chat for the night.
All right, and the last one goes to Bob A once again. He says, article I read today indicates Moskva's main role was to defend other naval assets from aerial attacks, and now it's gone. Black Sea Fleet can't recover this capacity.
Let's see. That is true. I actually think I said that a little bit earlier in the stream, and I said that the main goal of cruisers now is to defend from aircraft, whether they be launched from aircraft carrier or from land. Cruisers serve to pretty much screen the rest of the fleet from air attacks in a way. At least that's what their modern role has evolved into. So I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment in a way. And I do have to agree that their primary role is air defense nowadays. And so with that being said, we're now going to move on to the questions from the chat. And so what do we got,
And real quick, I want to recognize a $5 donation from Knuckles. Thank you very much, Knuckles. It's good to see you again on the channel. You are definitely a channel staple, so it's very good to see you. Next up, from our live chat questions, we have our first one, which give me just a moment to get those pulled up. Let's see here. We have one from Cam Kilo who says, Enforcer, how much economic sanctions affect Russian ability to continue the war?
The Russian economic sanctions, the economic sanctions on Russia affect them in ways that are almost immeasurable. First off, with Taiwan sanctioning them completely, the Russians are no longer able to import microchips and pretty much computer systems, CPUs and such, that they use to operate their weaponry and many other things across the country. And so in that regard, that's been completely wiped out. Some of the parts and equipment that they use to even refit their tanks is imported from abroad, and so those operations have shut down completely as well, with tank factories across the country not able to refurbish older tanks into newer upgraded variants. We know that Roscosmos, which is the Russian space company, said at the beginning of the war when the sanctions began that they would continue operations without the West and that they didn't need any supplies. Then also they threatened to take down the ISS, which was a little issue. And then later on, they were begging the West to lift the sanctions just specifically on them because they couldn't resume any of their normal operations due to a lack of parts and equipment. So the sanctions, at least in those particular examples, are shown to have a huge effect, and it even has an effect on Russia's flour and sugar supplies, as we've seen in videos prior weeks ago, that they were having a lot of sugar and wheat shortages, well, sugar and flour shortages across the majority of the country. So they have huge effects on the Russian economy, and while the Russians act like it's not really affecting them all too much, leave that standing for a few months, and that will probably rip their economy apart. It looks like they're trying to rebound right now, but this all looks like artificial control of the economy on the Russians' part, and artificial control can only last so long before things begin to tear apart. So I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next one is from Duncan VR, who says, do you think they will try that Russian general captured yesterday in The Hague?
I believe that they may. It looks like The Hague is actually around and active right now, trying to look at what's happened on the ground. And so I think the thing is that usually you don't want to try people in the middle of a war because it may be the terms of a peace agreement that the Russians hand over all their Ukrainian prisoners and the Ukrainians hand over all their Russian prisoners without anything happening to either one's side, even if they are known to be war criminals. So I think they'll actually wait until the war is over to then have that guy tried at The Hague, and they may make that a condition of the peace agreements in a way. So I thank you very much for the question. It's a great one, but that's kind of my input right now as to the matter, because usually with prisoners, you have to be very careful about how you treat them, because if you were to try that general and then have him executed for his crimes, the Russians may start executing Ukrainians for being fascists and other things, that they could fabricate on them. Not that the claims on the Russian general is fabricated at all, but you see where I'm going with this. They will commit reprisals and take out their anger on the Ukrainian prisoners, and so you want to be really careful with how you treat the Russian prisoners. And so I thank you very much for the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the last question of the night. And so who is the lucky person who got in the last question of the night?
So the lucky person of the night is a channel regular, Vicious Tuna, who says, Enforcer, do you think the Russian troop movements near Finland will give the Finns pause in joining NATO or expedite things? Slava Ukraine.
I think it's going to Slava Ukraini first. I think it's going to actually expedite things because the Finns, considering what we're seeing around the world, it looks like the Russians are going to threaten everyone who's not aligned with NATO, and so this may actually speed up Finland's process to try and enter NATO. We know that Finland used to be a part of the Russian Empire. We know that Putin's interests are mostly imperial and not Soviet-based, and so he probably is eyeballing retaking Finland and trying to add it as something of the Russian Empire in a way. So I think that the Finns will try and rush and join NATO because they could see themselves becoming the target of the next Russian invasion in a way. So I hope that does answer the question in a way, at least very briefly. And so with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I want to thank y'all all so much for bearing through with the internet connectivity issues and the stream issues that we had in the middle of the stream due to the weather outside. It was pretty rough stuff, but nonetheless, we did persevere and get through it. And so I thank you all so much once again. It has been a wonderful night. I hope you all have gotten a lot of interesting news. And this wraps up week 6 of the war in Ukraine. Tomorrow will be the first day of week 7. We will, of course, be streaming at the regular times of 10 p.m. Eastern Standard every single night. And so thank you all once again, and I'll see you all around. Good night, and take care.